Faye Renfro came home from church one Sunday in the spring of 1938 and found her gate hinge fixed. She had not asked anyone. There was no note. There was no man in sight. Just the gate, hanging true, swinging clean where it had dragged its corner in the dirt for 2 years. The next Sunday, the pump leather. The one after that, the cellar step, reset solid where it had gone soft and dangerous. She counted 12 Sundays before she understood there would be a 13th, and that the man doing it had said maybe 400 words in the 20 years since the Argonne took his lung. So one Sunday, she left a pie on the seat of his truck, and she began, quietly, to wonder why 60-some tins had never once come back. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before we go on, do me one small thing. Subscribe, and in the comments tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let's go back to Cedar Gap. Cedar Gap sat in Wright County, Missouri, back in the low green folds of the Ozarks, where the roads went to red mud in the spring, and the creeks ran full and cold. It was not much of a town. A feed store, a church, a bank that answered to bigger money in Springfield. But the land around it was worked hard by people who did not have much, and did not expect to. Faye Renfro worked 120 acres of it, and she worked them alone. She was 46 that spring, a widow 6 years. Her husband Tom had died in the winter of 1932, gone of a fever in 3 quick days that left her no time to argue with it. He was there, and then he was cooling, and then he was in the ground past the orchard with a stone she had paid for in eggs and butter over the better part of a year. After that, it was just her and the place. And the place was a hungry thing. 120 acres does not care that a woman is grieving. The cows still had to be milked. The garden still had to go in. The fences still went down in the wind and had to go back up. She learned to do the things Tom had done, and she learned them the slow way, with split knuckles and ruined attempts, and a temper she kept mostly to herself. There was the note, too. The lower 40 carried a debt. $280 owed to the Cedar Gap Bank, which was a small fortune to a woman selling cream and eggs and the odd hog. She had until the 1st of March, 1940, to find it. She did not know yet how she would. She only knew she would not lose that 40. It was the good bottom ground, and losing it would be the first crack that let everything else go. So Ada did not ask for help. She had a rule about it, though she'd never have called it a rule. She just believed all the way down that to be seen needing was to owe. And an account, once opened, wanted paying. She had enough to pay already. She did not intend to add to the ledger. That was the woman who came home from church that first Sunday in the spring of 1938 and found her gate hanging true. Now, there was a man in that county everyone knew and almost no one spoke to. Harlan Webb. He lived past the creek on a hard little place of his own with a shed and a Ford Model B truck and a silence that had grown around him like bark. He'd gone to France in 1917, a young man from a green country who had never seen the ocean, and he'd come back in 1919 to a country that had already stopped wanting to hear about it. He'd been at the Meuse Argonne. He'd caught the gas there, the mustard, the yellow low cloud that settled into a trench and settled into a man, and never fully left. His lung was scarred for it. In the cold weather he coughed, a deep, wet sound people crossed the road to avoid, less from unkindness than from a discomfort they couldn't name. And he had stopped talking, not all at once, just less and less, until the county reckoned Harlan Webb said maybe 400 words a year, and most of those were obliged and no and the price of a thing. He was 49. He was not old, but the war had put an old man's quiet on him, and he wore it, and folks let him. That Sunday Ada stood at her fixed gate a long while. She ran her thumb over the hinge. It was her own hinge, off her own gate, but someone had pulled the pin, worked the sag out of the post, rehung it plumb, and greased the works. It swung at a touch now. No shriek, no drag. She had cussed that gate 100 times. She had meant to fix it herself and never found the daylight. Someone had found it for her. She looked up the road. She looked down it. Empty both ways, just the dust settling, and a jay fussing in the cedar. She told herself it was Ruth's husband, maybe, or some passing kindness she'd forget by supper. She went in and started dinner and let it go. The second Sunday, she did not let it go. She came home from the Grange church service, and she went to draw water, and the pump gave her a full, clean pull on the first stroke. It had been sucking air for a month. The leather down in it had dried and cracked, and she'd been priming it with a cup of saved water every morning, cursing, thinking she'd get to it. The pump did not need priming now. Somebody had pulled the rod and set new leather, soft and wet, and dropped it back down the pipe. Ada stood with her hand on the cold iron and felt the first real cold finger of it go up her back. Not fear exactly, something stranger. The third Sunday, it was the cellar step. She'd nearly gone through that step twice, the soft one, third from the bottom, and she went down that Sunday afternoon for a jar of beans, holding her breath the way she'd learned to. The step held. It did not give the sick sponge under her weight it always gave. She knelt down in the cool dark and put her hand on it, and it was a new board, planed, set proud and solid on a fresh cleat. And that was when Faye Renfro understood the shape of the thing. It only happened on Sunday. It only happened while she was gone. Whoever it was knew the one morning in the week her wagon was surely down the road at the Grange church, knew it the way you know a neighbor's habits. And they came in that window and did the one thing, and they were gone before her wheels turned back up the lane. Somebody was watching her close enough to know when her house was empty. And instead of taking anything, they were leaving things mended. After that, the Sundays changed for her. She would come home, and she would put the horse up, and she would not go in the house. She would walk. She'd walk the whole place with her eyes down and sharp, the way you walk a field looking for a lost ring, hunting for the thing that was different this week. It became the shape of her Sunday afternoons. Church, then the road home, then the slow searching walk, the hinge of the corn crib, the washed-out place by the horse trough filled and tamped, a new hasp on the smokehouse, the clothesline she'd propped with a forked stick, now standing on a set post. Every Sunday, one thing. Never two. Never a note. Never a word. She'd stand in front of whatever it was and feel that same strange cold go up her, and under it, growing, something she did not have a good name for and did not much want to look at. It was in the 6th or 7th week that she saw the truck. She'd come home early. The preacher had cut it short with a summer cold, and she'd turned the wagon up her lane a full hour before she was due. And there at the far gate, half in the cedar shadow, sat a Model B truck she knew. Dark, dusty, a patched tire on the back. It was already pulling away when she saw it, easing off down the creek road slow and quiet, and she saw the shape of the man at the wheel. Hat low, shoulders set, not looking back. Harlan Webb. She did not chase it. She sat her wagon and watched it go, and then she drove up and found what he'd done that week, which was the loose board on the porch floor, the one that had caught her heel all winter, set right, nailed clean. So now she knew. And knowing, she found, did not settle it. It only opened the next question, which was why. And under that, the question she kept even further down, which was what a body was supposed to do about a debt that came to her one silent hinge at a time. She could not pay him. He would not take pay. She knew that in her bones without having to try it. A man who left no note did not want a coin pressed into his hand. But Ada could not abide an open account, so she did the only thing that felt like something. The next Sunday before church, she went out to the far gate where she'd seen the truck, and she left a jar of her blackberry preserve sitting square in the road dust where he could not miss it if he came. And she went to services, and she came home, and the jar was gone, and the harrow tooth she'd bent on a stone was straightened and back in its place. She started doing it every week after. a jar of preserves, a wrapped square of cornbread, a little tin of something set out where the truck would stand. And every week the food was gone, and one more thing on her place was mended. He took what she left. He never once knocked. He never once spoke. The tins, she thought, would come back eventually. A body always returned a borrowed tin. That was just how it was done in that country. You sent food in a dish, and the dish came home, and the dish went out full again to the next house that had a death or a birth or a hard week. That was the whole quiet machinery of the place. She didn't give it a second thought. The tins would come back. She was wrong about that, but she didn't know it yet. The summer went on that way, and it made a strange peace in her. She would not have admitted, if you'd asked her at the well or in the church pew, that she looked forward to Sundays. But she did. She caught herself in the garden on a Thursday, wondering what it would be this week. She caught herself keeping a mental list of every broken thing on the place, not with the old grinding dread, but with something almost like anticipation, as though her farm's every wound was a note in a conversation she was having with a man she had not once spoken to. And then in the late summer, the two repairs that changed it from a curiosity into something with a floor that dropped out from under her. The first was the windmill. The tail vane had been shot for a year, hanging at a bad angle, so the wheel would not turn to face the wind and the water came slow. She came home one Sunday, and the vane was true, and the wheel was spinning fast and bright in the hot air, and the tank was full to the lip and running over into the trough. She stood and watched it turn, and felt her throat go tight for no reason she could defend. The second was the smokehouse door. The hinge on the smokehouse door had sagged since before Tom died. Tom had promised to fix it. She could hear him say it. He'd stood right there in the spring of 1931 with his hands on his hips and said he'd get to that hinge come warm weather, and then there'd been the planting, and then there'd been the drought, and then there'd been the fever. And Tom had gone in the ground with that hinge still sagging. And it had gone on sagging for 6 more years because every time Ada looked at it, she heard him promise, and she couldn't bring herself to touch it. That Sunday, the smokehouse door hung plumb. Somebody had lifted it and shimmed the top hinge and set a new screw where the old wood had stripped, and now it swung shut soft and even and latched with a click. Ada went into the smokehouse and shut the door behind her, and she stood in the cool dark that smelled of old hickory smoke and salt, and she stayed there a long, long time. Because it wasn't just a hinge. Harlan Webb couldn't have known that. He'd only seen a sagging door and a stripped screw, and a thing that wanted fixing. The way he saw all of it. He could not have known that this particular door was the last thing Tom Renfro ever promised her, and never did. He could not have known that a dead man had lived in that sag for 6 years. But he'd fixed it. And now Tom's last undone thing was done. By another man's hands. On a Sunday. While she was at church, she came out of the smokehouse when it was near dark, and her face was dry, but something in her had shifted the way ground shifts, slow and permanent. She did not yet let herself grieve it. That would come later. But the ghost had a name now, spoken in her own head where she'd kept it locked, and the man past the creek had loosened it a half-turn, without ever knowing he'd touched it. The town, of course, had eyes. It could not go on all summer. A man's truck at the widow Renfro's gate every Sunday morning, without the county sorting it and passing judgment. And the judgment came, as those things do, at the church social in the early fall. It was in the churchyard after the harvest service, the tables out under the oaks, the men standing in their clumps, and the women moving the food, and the children running loose. Ada was there with her 2 pies and her good dress, and she felt it before she understood it. A cooling. A set of glances that slid off her when she turned. A quiet in the little group of women that closed up a beat too smooth when she came near. It was Ruth who said it to her plain. Her own daughter. Ruth had married a Sackett and lived in town now, and Ruth had her mother's straight back and none of her mother's patience. She got Ada by the elbow and walked her a little apart, toward the wagons, and she said it low and fast. "The way you say a thing you've been holding." "Mama, folks are talking." Ada said she supposed folks were always talking. "About Webb's truck," Ruth said. "At your gate. Every Sunday. It's noticed, Mom, and it isn't decent. A man like that. And you at services. Him not even coming inside a church, and his truck sitting in your lane while the whole road drives past to worship. What are they to think?" Ada asked what a man like what. And Ruth had the grace to color a little. But she said it anyway. "You know what I mean. He's not right, Mama the War. The way he is. He doesn't speak. He coughs like the grave. And you, letting his truck stand at your gate like it belongs there." She squeezed Ada's arm. "It isn't decent. Think of me. Think of the children." Ada looked at her daughter, and she thought about the smokehouse hinge, and she did not say one word of it. She said Ruth's pie was drying out on the table, and she'd best see to it. And that was when Roy Castle came across the grass. Roy Castle was 52, a widower, and he owned good bottomland free and clear on the far side of Cedar Gap. He was a big, easy, well-kept man in a clean collar, the kind of man mothers pointed daughters toward, and the kind the bank was glad to see coming. He'd been circling Ada for a year in the correct and open way, walking her to her wagon, sitting near her at the socials, and everybody in that churchyard understood exactly what Roy Castle was, and exactly what he wanted. And everybody approved. He came up now and tipped his hat and made his easy talk, and he walked Ada to her wagon in front of the whole assembled county, which was itself a kind of announcement, and she let him because there was no graceful way not to. He helped her up onto the seat. He kept his hand on the wagon's rail a moment, and he said, "Low and kind, Ada, I heard the bank's got a note on your lower 40. 280, come next spring." He let that sit. "I'd count it no trouble at all to have a word with them, or to see it settled out right. A thing like that oughtn't sit on a woman's shoulders alone." It was gently done. It was decently done. It was, Ada knew, the whole town's dream for her laid out plain on a wagon rail. The prosperous widower, the cleared note, the good house, the decent, seen, approved life, where a woman never again lay awake over $280. And 30 feet away, everyone watching, the county did its arithmetic. It looked at Roy Castle in his clean collar, with his free and clear land, and his offer of rescue, and it looked, in its mind's eye, at the silent gassed wreck past the creek, whose truck sat in her lane, and it sorted them the way water sorts sand, without effort, without doubt. The approved man and the ruin. There was no contest in it. There was hardly a thought. Ada thanked Roy for his kindness. She did not say yes, and she did not say no. She gathered her lines, and she drove home, and she said nothing the whole way but the clicking she made to the horse. That night she sat by her stove a long time, with the two things laid side by side in her mind. Roy Castle's hand on the wagon rail, and the smokehouse door that swung soft and clicked shut. Winter came down hard that year, and it changed nothing. You'd have thought the snow would end it. It didn't. The Sundays kept coming, and so did he. She came home through cold that cracked the ground, and the clothesline post that had heaved in the frost was reset in a collar of concrete he must have mixed in her own shed with water he must have hauled. Another Sunday, 40 feet of new hog wire strung tight along the lot where the old had rusted through. The chimney flashing, that had leaked a brown stain down her upstairs wall for 3 winters, sealed, the stove damper that had stuck half shut and smoked up her kitchen every morning, freed and oiled so it swung with one finger. And never once, not one single Sunday in all of it, did he tell her which thing he'd fixed. That was the piece that worked on her through the long nights. She'd lie in the cold house and turn it over. It would have been so easy for him to say. A word on the seat, a line on a scrap. Fixed your damper. Nothing. He never named it. He left her to find it every week, walking her own place in the snow like a woman hunting Easter eggs. And she could not, for weeks, understand why a man would go to all that silent labor and then refuse the one small word that would let her know the shape of her own gratitude. And then one night by the stove, working it like a knot in cold hands, she got it. And when she got it, she sat very still. Because if he named the thing, she would have to thank him. And a thank you, given and received, was a closed account. It was a settled thing. It was an ending. You thanked a man for a kindness, and the kindness was complete, and the two of you bowed and the ledger balanced, and it was over. And there was no reason under God for him to come back the next Sunday, or any Sunday after. But he never named it. So she could never thank him. So the account could never close. So he had to come back. He had built himself, hinge by pump leather by damper, out of nothing but silence and Sundays, an unpayable reason to stand in her yard for the rest of his life. He had made himself impossible to square up with. On purpose. Ada sat by the stove with that understanding sitting in her chest like a swallowed coal, warm and enormous, and she did not know whether to laugh or to weep, and she was not, in that moment, entirely sure she was not doing both. The deep of that winter brought the second thing loose in her. She went out to the smokehouse one gray afternoon to cut off a side of bacon, and she stood in the door that no longer sagged, and she let herself, for the first time in 6 years, grieve Tom clean. Not the raw grief. That had come and gone years back, in its own black season. This was different. This was the grief of the letting go. She stood in the smokehouse, and she said to the empty smoky air that it was all right, that she'd waited on that hinge a long time out of love for him, and it was fixed now, and she was glad it was fixed, and she was not going to hold it against the man who'd fixed it, that he wasn't Tom. She told her husband, in that cold shed, that she was still standing, and the place was still hers, and she was going to go on. And she felt something she'd been carrying since 1932 set itself down, gentle in the sawdust and the salt. She came out with her bacon and her eyes stinging in the cold. And the ghost, for the first time in 6 years, did not follow her back to the house. It was that same week, the ground iron, the sky low and mean, that Faye Renfro made her move. She understood the game now. She understood it all the way down. He had built her an unpayable debt and hidden inside it where she could never reach him with a thank you. Any other woman might have marched out past the creek and cornered him and made him hear the words. Ada did not. Ada answered him in his own language. She got up before light on a Sunday and she baked a dried apple pie, because it was the dead of winter and dried apples were what she had, and she made it the way her mother had made it, with the crust cut in and the sugar just short of too much, the way that made a body close their eyes on the first bite. She wrapped it warm in a clean cloth, and she did not leave it out at the gate where she left the everyday jars. She walked out to where his truck stood in the cedar shadow that morning, before church, in the hard cold. And she opened the door of the Model B, and she set that pie square in the middle of the seat, where he could not start his engine without seeing it. And she shut the door soft. And she went to church. Do you see what she'd done? She'd given him a thing he could never pay back. A whole pie, made with her own hands in the black cold morning, set inside his own truck, offered to a man who was never there to refuse it and could never, ever hand it back. The same move. Reversed, turned around on him like his own key in his own lock. Two people, now, each building the other a debt, neither would let the other settle. Each leaving the other something that could never be squared. Each of them, silent, refusing the ending, refusing the closed account, refusing the bow and the balanced ledger that would have let them politely let go of one another forever. That was the courtship. That was the whole of it. Two stubborn, wounded, unspeaking people, past their youth, past their prime, past the age when the county thought either of them had any business with a beating heart, conducting the truest love affair in Wright County entirely, in hinges and pump leather and pie, and neither one of them would ever, ever say its name. She came home from church that Sunday, and she did not walk the place hunting. She went straight out to where the truck had stood. It was gone. and the tire tracks turned down the creek road same as always. But this time, Ada stood in the cold and put her hand flat against her own chest. Because she wanted, more than she had wanted anything in 6 hard years, to know one small thing she had no way on earth to know. Whether, wherever he was right now, down that frozen road, Harlan Webb had opened his truck door and found her pie on his seat and understood. She had no way to know. He would never tell her. That was the deal they'd made without a word. But somewhere out past the creek, on a shelf in a shed she had never seen and was never meant to see, something was already waiting that would answer her someday. Something she had started 60-some tins ago and never once thought to wonder about. She just didn't know it yet. The spring of 1939 came in slow and wet. The creek ran high. The lower 40 stood in water a week before it drained, and Ada watched it from the porch and thought about the note. $280. Due to the bank at Cedar Gap the 1st of March 1940, she had a year. She told herself she had a year the way you tell yourself the roof will hold one more winter. But that spring she was not thinking mostly of money. She was thinking of pie. She had started it in the cold months. Dried apple. Because that was what a body had in January. She'd set it on the seat of the Model B the way he set his work on her place. No note. No knock. She drove her wagon to church and did not look back. And it went. Every time, it went. So she made another. Rhubarb, when the first red stalks came up by the well. Then blackberry in July, when the canes down the fence line hung so heavy the branches bowed to the ground. She picked till her fingers were stained purple to the second knuckle. She baked in the heat of the morning with the flies at the screen. And she carried it out to the gate and set it on his seat and left. He never said a word. But things kept getting fixed. That was the thing she could not get over. Not that he came, that he watched. One morning in October, a hard freeze was coming. She smelled it the night before. She meant to cover the well and forgot, the way you forget a thing at 52 that you'd never have forgot at 30. She came home from services and the well was covered. Sacking and board, weighted with a stone. She had not asked. She had not even thought it out loud. He'd thought it for her. She started leaving coffee out. Hot, on the porch rail, in the tin cup with the blue rim. She'd pour it just before she left and drive off knowing it would go cold before he ever came near the house. It didn't matter. When she came home, the cup would be drained and rinsed, set upside down on the rail to dry. A man who would not speak to her had rinsed her cup and set it to dry. She stood on the porch and held that cup in both hands like it was warm still. And it wasn't. And she didn't care. The degrees were melting. That was the only word she had for it. Ice off a pane, 1 degree at a time, no word spoken, and no word needed. The whole county thought a courtship was a thing you did with words. Ada Faye Renfro knew better now. She was living the truest one in Wright County, and it was made of hog wire and pump leather and a rinsed cup. There were the tins, though. She had lost track. Somewhere past 60, she'd stopped counting. Dried apple, rhubarb, blackberry, pumpkin at the harvest social, every one of them on a good tin. Her tins, the ones her mother left her, and not a single one had ever come back. And this is the small ugly thing she let herself feel, because a person has to feel something. She decided he was careless. A man alone out past the creek, throwing her good tins on a shed floor, letting them rust. It was easier to be a little angry than to be a lot in love, so she let herself be a little angry about the tins. It cost nothing. It kept her feet under her. She'd get them back eventually, she supposed. A body always returns a borrowed tin. Then Roy Castle came to call. He came correct. He came on a Tuesday, in the daylight, up the front lane in his good coat, hat in his hand at the bottom step the way a decent man does it. Roy was 52 and prosperous, and his bottom land was free and clear. Not a dollar owed on it, and he had buried a good wife and mourned her the proper year, and now he had come to Ada in the proper way. "Ada," he said, "I'll speak it plain. All right, Roy, that note of yours comes due in the spring. 280 to the bank." He turned his hat in his hands. "I could clear it. Tomorrow, I'd not even feel it go." He looked at her steady. "And you'd not have to work 120 acres alone into your grave. There's a good house waiting, a dry one, wired for lights." He said that last soft, like it was the sweetest thing he owned. You'd never carry a lamp up a dark stair again. And God help her, she wanted it. Not him. The rest of it. The dry house, and the cleared note, and the lights, and the not being afraid. She was tired in her bones. She'd been tired 6 years. "You're a good man, Roy Castle," she said, and meant it. "I know what the town says," he said, "about the other. I'll not speak against a man. But you know as well as me it isn't decent, Ada, and it isn't going anywhere. That man hasn't got a word in him." "No," she said, "he hasn't." "Then let me." He put his hat back on. "I'll not press you. But I'll want an answer before the note falls due." "You'll have one," she said. "Give me the winter." He tipped his hat and went back down the lane, and she stood on the step and watched a good, safe, decent life walk away from her in a good coat, and she did not call it back. Ruth came the next week, and it was worse. "He was here again Sunday," Ruth said. She had her youngest on her hip. "Everybody in Cedar Gap knows it, Mama. Roy Castle offers you the world, and you leave pie in a truck for a man who can't string 2 words. Her voice cracked. "It isn't decent." "What am I to tell people?" "Tell them your mother's 48 and pays her own way," Ada said. "That'll hold them a while." But she didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark house, the unwired, unlit lamp and shadow house Tom had promised her and never done, and she thought maybe Ruth was right. Maybe it was a foolishness, a woman past her prime, mooning over a wreck of a man who'd been ruined in France before Ruth was even born. She had the winter to decide. She figured she'd decide. Then February came, and the Sundays went empty. The first empty Sunday, she thought nothing of it. Weather, a man gets ahead of his own list. She came home, and the place was just as she'd left it, and she said, out loud, to the cold kitchen, "Well, he's earned a Sunday." The second empty Sunday sat wrong in her. Nothing fixed. Nothing touched. No truck at the gate. No tracks turning down the creek road. The place stood exactly as she'd left it that morning, and for 2 years, it never once had. She walked the whole 120 acres that afternoon in the cold, hunting a change, and found none. The gate was as she'd left it. The pump was as she'd left it. Everything was as she'd left it, and it felt like a house with the clock stopped. The third empty Sunday, she did the thing she had never once done in 2 years. She drove out past the creek. She'd never seen his place, never been meant to. The road turned to ruts and then to 2 tracks in dead grass, and there at the end of it stood a gray shed and a gray house behind it, and the Model B parked cold, hood dull with frost that hadn't burned off though it was near noon. The truck hadn't moved in days. A man's truck tells on him. She got down. She meant to knock at the house, but the shed door stood open a hand's width, and she went to it first, the way you go to the smaller fear before the larger one, and she pushed it, and it swung, and the winter light fell in past her onto a shelf along the back wall. And Ada Faye Renfro stopped breathing. The tins. Every one of them. 60-some. More, washed, scoured, bright. Stacked in careful towers along the whole length of that shelf. Biggest on the bottom, small on the top, ordered like a thing a man tends. And under each tin, tucked half beneath the rim so the wind wouldn't take it, a slip of paper. She took one up with a hand that shook. Pencil. His hand? She knew it must be, though she'd never seen a line of his writing in her life. Small, square letters, pressed hard. Dried apple. Third Sunday, January, snow that morning. She set it down. Took another. Rhubarb, first of the thaw. She left the coffee out. Another, blackberry, hot day. Her fingers were stained. I could see it on the cup. Ada put her hand over her mouth. He had been keeping count. The man who would not tell her what he fixed so the account could never close. That same man had washed and stacked and dated every single thing she ever sent him. 60-some slips of paper. A record. The only record of her that existed anywhere on this earth, kept in pencil, in a shed, by a man who couldn't say 400 words in 20 years. She had thought him careless with her tins. He had been keeping the only account of her a body ever kept. She didn't cry. Not yet. She set the slip down exactly where it had been, under the rim, careful, like putting a bird back in a nest. And then she turned and walked to the gray house, and did not knock. She opened the door. The house was cold. Colder inside than out, the way a house gets when the fire's been let die and nobody's built it back. And she heard, from the back room, the sound that told her everything before she ever reached him. The cough. She'd heard him cough at his truck 100 Sundays. A hard, dry bark and cold air. This was not that. This came up wet and deep and long, and at the end of it a whistle, like wind in a cracked flue, and she knew, a farm woman knows, that the whistle was the man's own chest, and there was water in it that would not come out. He was in a narrow bed by the window, 49 years old, and he looked 70. The scarring on his neck and jaw, where the gas had taken him in 1918, stood out livid against a face gone gray. His eyes came open when the floor creaked. They found her. And the thing in them was not surprise. It was shame. He'd have died before he let her see this. That was plain on him. Harlan, she said. First time she'd ever said his name to his face. It came out of her rough. He worked to get the breath. Then he gave her the lie. She saw him build it, saw him spend strength he didn't have to make it come out even. Just quit, he said. 2 words, ground out on almost no air. Got tired of it. That's all. A breath. You go on home. He wanted her to think he'd simply stopped, gotten bored, or bothered, or moved on the way any man might. He was trying, with what was left of him, to hand her the easy story that he'd quit her, so she'd never have to know the truth was this. Was the wet whistle, was the gas finishing 22 years late what it started at the Muse. He'd rather she thought he didn't care than know he was dying. That was his kindness. That was his whole terrible kindness, and she saw straight through it, because she had spent 2 years learning to read a man who wouldn't talk. You're a poor liar, Harlan Webb, she said. You never once told me the truth about anything you fixed, and now you want me to believe the one thing you'll say plain. She pulled the room's one chair to the bed. No, I don't believe you got tired. He shut his eyes. A tear ran back into his hair. He did not argue. He hadn't the air to argue. She built his fire back. She heated water. She sat with him through that afternoon and into the dark. And along toward evening, in pieces, a few words at a breath, she got the rest of it out of him. Not because he wanted to give it, but because she would not leave, and he was too weak to make her. The last job. The one he hadn't finished. The one Sunday he'd known he couldn't complete because his own chest had put him on his back. That would have been the Sunday she found out. So he'd stopped. Cold, rather than let her walk her place one Sunday and find the work half done and a note, or find him fallen in her yard, or find out at all. He'd have her think he quit. It was the last thing he could give her, and he'd tried to give it, and she wouldn't take it. What was it, she said? The last job. He wouldn't say. Of course he wouldn't. Even now. Even here. So, she found out herself. She went home that night, and the next morning, in daylight, she went into her own house and looked at it new. And she found it in the cellar and up the wall between the joists. Wire, new wire, run neat and clean and stapled true, up from the cellar and along the beams, most of the way. Most of the way and then stopping. Bare ends. Waiting, he had been wiring her house. The lines had come through Cedar Gap in 1937. The RIA. The whole valley had signed but her. $5 for the membership, and she'd never had the 5 to spare, nor the nerve. A widow woman signing her name to one more thing she owed. So she'd gone without. Lamp and shadow. Same as always. And Harlan Webb, on his Sundays, silent, had been quietly running the wire, so that one day her house would fill with light, and she'd never know whose hands had done it. She sat down on the cellar stair, and she wept then. Finally, because it was the same wire. It was the very thing. The house wired for lights. Tom had promised her that. Tom Renfro, dead 8 years in the ground since the winter of 1932, had stood in this kitchen and sworn he'd bring her the modern house, the lights, no more carrying a lamp up a dark stair. And he died with it undone. Same as the smokehouse hinge he'd promised in the spring of 31 and never hung. 2 men, the dead one and the dying one, and both their unfinished promises were the same wire in the same wall. She'd stood in that smokehouse 2 years back and grieved Tom and thought she'd let him go. She hadn't, all the way. Not till now. Now on the cellar stair, with another man's careful staples over her head, she let Tom Renfro go entire. Not bitter, not sorry. She just opened her hand and let him rise off it. He'd meant to. He'd run out of time. Men do. But this one hadn't run out. Not quite. Not yet. She could finish it herself. She drove to the county seat on a Monday. Wright County, the courthouse square, the little RIA co-op office with the frost on the glass. She walked in and set her money on the counter, the $5 and more, the last of what she'd saved against the note. And she did not care about the note anymore. She'd sort the note. She'd sort it somehow. Membership, she said. The Renfro place. Cedar Gap. The clerk turned the sheet to her. A line for her name. She signed it. Ada Faye Renfro, in a hand steadier than she felt. And then, beside her own name, in the same ink, she wrote his. Harlan Webb. The clerk looked at the 2 names. He didn't ask. He stamped it. And I'll want a man to finish the wiring, Ada said. Run to code. There's most of it done already. Good work. It only wants finishing. Somebody started it? The clerk said. Somebody did, she said. And that was when Roy Castle came through the door on his own errand, stamping the cold off his boots, and stopped, because he saw her there at the counter, with the pen still in her hand. He looked at the sheet. He was too much a gentleman to lean and read it, but he didn't have to. He read her face. Roy Castle was a widower and a fool for no one, and he saw, standing in that office, plain as the frost on the glass, that he had lost. Not to a better argument. Not to a richer man, to a shed full of clean tins he'd never see and never understand. Roy, she said. Ada. He turned his hat once in his hands. You've made your choice then. I have. He was quiet a moment. Then, to his everlasting credit, he did not say one hard word. He's a sick man, was all he said, gentle. You know that. I do. And you'll do it anyway. I will. Roy nodded slow. Well, he said, I'd have cleared your note. I'd have done it glad. He set his hat on. I'll speak to the bank regardless, not as a suitor, as a neighbor. A widow oughtn't lose 40 acres over $280 because the man she wanted couldn't buy her out. He touched the brim. That's all. Good day, Ada, and he went, and she stood there undone by the grace of him, and thought there were more kinds of good men in the world than the county gave it credit for. The lights came on a week later, at dusk. She'd asked Ruth to come, and 2 of the neighbor women besides, the very ones who'd stood at the church social and said it wasn't decent. She wanted them there. She wasn't proud of wanting it, but she wanted it. They came and stood on the porch in the falling dark, uneasy, not knowing why they'd been called. Ada went to the wall where the man had set the switch. She put her hand on it. Mama, Ruth said. What are you? She threw it. And the house, Tom's promise, Harlan's labor, her own finishing, the house filled with light. Every window at once, yellow, steady, electric light, pouring out onto the dark porch and out across the yard, and the three women stood in it with their mouths open, and none of them said a word, because there wasn't a word to say. The rules had bent. Right there in front of them, the rules had bent, and the light had won, and they saw it. Ruth put her hand to her mouth. "Oh, Mama," she said. Small, like a girl. "Yes," Ada said. She left them on the lit porch, and she took the wagon out past the creek in the dark. She'd had them turn his bed. She'd asked the county nurse to do it, days back, turn his narrow bed to the window, the one that faced west, across the Black Valley toward the Renfro Ridge, so that a man who could not sit up could still see out. He was awake. Turned to the glass, and across the dark valley, where for 8 years there had been nothing after sundown but the one weak wobble of a lamp, her house stood lit. Every window, a handful of yellow light thrown out on the night like something spilled. He was looking at it when she came in. He didn't turn his head. He couldn't spare the breath to turn his head, but she saw his eyes were wet and open and fixed on those windows across the valley, and she knew he'd worked out whose lights they were, and how they'd got finished, and what it meant that she'd put them where he could see. He'd wanted her never to know. He'd built his whole silent kindness around her, never knowing. And she had answered him the only way that could not be refused. She had turned on the lights in his own sight, from a bed he could not leave, so that the thing he'd done in secret shone back at him across the dark, and he could not hand it back. The same move, reversed, one more time. He got the words out. She had to lean to hear them. "You oughtn't have," he whispered. And then, because even now, even here, he would try. "Thank you'd have done. You didn't have to, a breath. A whistle. A thank you would have squared it." There it was. The last try. Even dying, he reached for the closed account. "Say thank you, Ada, and we're even, and you can let go of me clean." She sat down in the chair by the bed. She'd brought a thing in with her, wrapped in a cloth, and she set it out on the quilt over his chest, where his own weak hand could reach it if it wanted to. A pie tin, one of the 60-some. She'd taken one back off his shelf, clean, empty. Her mother's tin. "No," she said. "I'll not thank you, Harlan Webb, and I'll not let you thank me." She laid her hand over his on the quilt. It was cold, and it was light as a bird. "You kept better count of me than the Lord did. 2 years, and every tin dated, and me thinking you careless." Her voice held. She made it hold. "I'll not let you square up now. The account stays open. You hear me? It stays open on purpose." His eyes closed. The tear went back into his hair the way it had that first afternoon. "That's the deal," she said, soft. "You taught it me. Never say which. Never close it out." "So we don't." She leaned and put her mouth close to the ruined ear. "I'm not letting go of you. There's nothing you can fix will make me. You've run clean out of things to hand me back." He didn't answer. He couldn't. But his hand turned over, slow, under hers, and his cold fingers closed on hers and held. That was his 400 words. That was the whole speech he had. A hand turning over in the dark. She took it. It was plenty. It was everything he'd ever been able to say, and she'd learned, over 2 years and 60-some tins, exactly how to read it. She stayed the night. And whether he lived out that season, or the next, or only to the thaw, that's held gentle here, the way you hold a thing too tender to press. What matters is, she named it. Sitting by that bed, in the light of her own far windows, Ada Faye Renfro named out loud the truest love in Wright County. A thing built entirely of hinges and pump leather and pie, that neither of them, for 2 long stubborn years, had ever once dared to call by its name. She named it. He heard it. That was enough. 6 months on, the Renfro place stands different. The porch light burns at dusk, every dusk, steady and yellow, and you can see it from the creek road, and folks slow their wagons a little going by, just to look. The smokehouse hinge doesn't sag. 19 years it sagged, and now it swings true, And every time Ada opens that door, she thinks of two men and one wire, and lets them both be at peace. Up on the rise, the windmill turns on its new vane, and the lower 40 is hers, free and clear. Roy Castle spoke to the bank as a neighbor, like he said, and something got worked out, and Ada let it. Because pride is a thing you can finally set down at 48. Ruth brings the grandchildren now, brings them to a house full of light, and lets them run the switch up and down till Ada tells her to quit before she wears it out. Ruth stood on that porch the night the lights came, and she's never once said the word decent again. "I was wrong, Mama," she said, and that was all, and it was enough. Roy Castle married a cousin from over at Hartville that autumn. A good match. When they pass on the road, he tips his hat, and Ada nods, and there's no hardness in it. A decent man who lost clean and stayed decent, and the county's the better for him. And on a shelf in Ada's own kitchen now, where she can see them every day of her life, stand the tins. 60-some. Washed, and scoured, and stacked. Biggest on the bottom, small on the top, ordered the way he ordered them. And under each one, tucked half beneath the rim so no draft takes it, a slip of paper in pencil. His hand. Dried apple, 3rd Sunday of January. Snow that morning. Blackberry, her fingers stained. He could see it on the cup. She moved them from his shed to her house, every one, and she kept them exactly as he wrote them, and she doesn't let a soul touch them. They're the only love letters either one of them ever managed. 60-some slips of pencil, dated, in a shed, by a man who couldn't say it. Because that's the thing, and maybe you already know it. Some people can't say it. Not because it isn't there, because it's too much there, and the words were never the tool they had. So they say it in a rehung gate, in a covered well, in wire run neat up a cold wall so a woman won't climb a dark stair anymore. They keep count in pencil in a place you were never meant to see. And the whole trick of a life, the whole quiet miracle of it, is whether there's somebody near enough and patient enough to learn how to read it before the counting stops. Ada learned. Late, but she learned. So tell me, and I mean this, in the comments. Tell me about the quiet one in your life. The one who fixed the thing and never said why. The one who left it on the seat and drove off before you could thank them. Tell me the town you're watching from, and tell me their name so somebody says it out loud. Because some of them are still out there. Fixing your gate while you're gone, keeping better count of you than you'll ever know. And it is never ever too late to learn to read it.